Hi, my name's Luke Solomon, and we are currently in my studio called The Wash House, which is in Barnet in North London. The track that I have up and working with is called Gods and Monsters, which is a collaboration but a new single for my forthcoming album on Classic. The vocalist is a guy called Terry Grant, who is based in Nashville. So some of the work on this was done remotely, and then some of it was done using live instruments with musicians that were drafted into the studio. What I usually do if I'm working with vocalists especially is I usually work where I get to them pretty much a complete piece of music and then send the idea over to them as almost a complete thing that they can kind of write over the top. It depends on the writing process, where you'll go through kind of an idea for the song, some song lyrics and stuff like that, and it's usually with someone I work with that's got a similar kind of way of thinking in regards to lyric and song content and what that's about. But yes, in this instance, he just sent back the bounces of his vocals in multiple takes. Some of it was comped, some of it was uncomped, some of it was treated, some of it wasn't. He's a producer as well, so he sent a wet vocal as well, which are and BVs, which he ended up some of it being actually mixed, and comped and treated. So I use elements of both I used really. In this particular track, we have here the lead vocal, which, again, because it was worked on remotely, he would send back sort of multiple takes and stuff that I was happy with, and I kind of end up comping it like that. If there are any instances where I need stuff recorded, it gets bounced back again. In this instance, I think I used the wet vocal. And partially the dry vocal.
One cut the deepest, one memory escapes. So soft the teardrop, no memory can shape. One little whimper, one clenching of the fist. One little liar, no memory will miss.
So what I will do with the vocal here is send the mono vocal, the mono channel, out to a stereo group, and then I usually treat everything in the stereo group. So here, as you can see, multiple methods of EQ. So I get to a place with certain things where I'll EQ something with a certain plugin. So generally I use the Cambridge plugin for a lot of things, because I like not so much the sound of it. I mean, the sound's really cool. There are lots of other plugins that I use for EQ, but I like the ease of how I can use and how I can work with it. Part of the UAD package. It's generally, from a vocal perspective, really cool. Then run LA2A, which adds a little bit of colour I find from the plugin as well, and it's a great straight up simple limiter. Then in this instance on the vocal as well, I've got max bass running, which is a little trick that I learned from an engineer that I was working out in an external studio, which has added, even though I've taken away tones, as you can see in the EQ, it's added a little part of an octave down to the vocal as well to give it some weight. And then to stereo, I have here just a classic analog delay, vocal delay, like a small tap, which I've messed with the preset slightly on it, which I end up changing the saturation and the type of delay that it's modelled on. Sound toys I use a lot for those sort of basic vocal parts. I use the decapitator, etc., on various certain things. And then with the vocal here, to boost the vocal is also a BV.
One cut the deepest, one memory escapes.
Which is a panned,
so soft, the teardrop, no memory
pitched up, octave up.
One clenching of the fist. Did you pitch that yourself? One little liar.
He sent the recording like that. Actually, sent the recording with the. I think it's got a pitch shifter on it, but also
I'm ugly inside.
It's got an octave up on it.
Outside,
and then here,
I'm ugly inside.
Is just a copy.
Now I'm ugly just like you.
The copy of the backing vocal again, which is panned to the other side, which I've stereoed
Now I'm ugly outside
of the lead vocal, which adds more stereo effect to the vocal. So I tend to do that a lot. We'll add, I'll take a copy of the full lead of the main vocal, double it up, and then re-cue it slightly differently and pan it sort of hard right or left with a slight tap on it, which will be on the opposite side, just to open the stereo field and stuff for the vocals. So, yeah, and then that's kind of EQing it to fit in with the track.
I'm ugly inside. Now I'm ugly just like you. The foolish suffer for wisdom and for truth. A dying blessing for the wayward.
And you can see from the waveforms on here as well, I've actually sort of increased the vocal volume as the song goes along, so it creates a bit more of an impact and a drive with the song. So as it extended out, the volume starts to nudge slightly, and then I also go in and do kind of volume controls as well with the vocals. I mean, from dance music point of view, there is a kind of definitive line between sort of recording dance songs with vocals and then songs that have got ad-libs or vocal samples in. I've always come from the place where vocals, original vocals, I enjoy writing. I like writing a lot, write a lot of songs. I like writing melodies, I like writing top line, and I actually genuinely like working with singers because it adds a vibe and tells a story, and you can kind of put a little bit of your life into the song, which is really important for me. And even though it's dance music, it's kind of irrelevant, it's still a song. So I mean, for me, from the mixing, I mean, I very much work where I mix and produce and write all at the same time. I do have a final mixing process, but the final mixing process, when I go back and strip everything away, I generally tend to take all the vocals out and make that the last point of my mixing to get those to sit right and then rebalance stuff. So in this instance, I would have worked on this song with all the vocals out to end up the instrumental version of the track, then got the vocals to sit on top. And then my starting point for most of the songs that I make is usually drum based. On this particular song, I have used Machine, which is here. And I will get a groove and a feel or a basic sound with the drums happening, which you will be able to hear here. It's quite simple. And then I have various different groups set up. I use Machine in a quite an odd way, because I'll just generally set up separate groups. I don't go in and write the drums in as I go along and add fills and do all those things. I usually set everything up on individual channels, on individual tracks, and then run those as an instrument chat in here. And then, as you can see, I go in and automate everything within the actual body of the arrangement itself. I know you can kind of get quite into Machine and do a lot of stuff on the fly and record things and various things like that. But I generally don't seem to work like that, because my drums, or my electronic drums, will be the kind of background, the point where everything sort of sits behind. Then I generally like to add a lot of live percussion and various different drums and live drummers and things like that on top of everything. But that's where I get my kind of movement and modulations and various things like that. So in this one, I've got a couple of other things going on, separate sort of live kicks, a couple of things running off of Stylus, which I find quite good for writing sort of very basic percussion. Then what I generally do with Stylus, I use it for stuff like shakers, tambourines, congas, and then I'll use those as a template for the percussionist and the drummer. send everything back to the drummer if I'm working remotely. So in this song, I worked with Danny Harrison, Moody Mank, where he's got everything set up in his studio at home. I'll send him instances. I'll send him the complete track with the percussion and the live drums on, then send it without, with just basically the kick drum and the basic electronic beats. And then he will record over the top of it and send me back the stems on varying different things that he will have mic'd up in different instances. So he will send me 3 different mic examples of a snare drum, the hi-hat recorded on various different hi-hats, various different microphones, then percussion and congas, etc., snares, fills, and then he'll send me the comp stems of those. I drop everything back into the track, then start to edit stuff back and comp everything myself again, so I'll end up with cut up loops and edits of various things that he's done. But what I find is it kind of will add the modulation to the track and what have you. So we've got here, for instance, he's got his kind of shaker fills, which I've edited down to 4-bar loops. Congas will be, again, just basic loops of things. So with my drums, basically I have I set up a drum bus, and what I will do is when I start to build my swing and my grooves and various different things in Machine and my multiple channels that are set up in Machine, I then start to sort of, once I've got a basic idea or a basic groove, I start to get further into the detail and the idea of and the different drum sounds and stuff that works and stuff that doesn't work and moves away. So here I've got kind of a mixture of a lot of the Machine stuff. I've got a massive library as well built up of my own samples, which I tend to add to things. So a broken fork in this and some other samples. And then one by one, I'll go through those and start to group them through into the drum bus. So in this instance, there's only a shaker, there's a few things, and there's the track goes on. And so with my drum bus on here, I've got a tape bus from the UAD Fatso, which I've kind of manipulated the tape bus slightly. What that tends to do when you listen to it in and out, you've got this kind of messy, unglued drum sound happening where all the elements are really cool, but there's nothing in the forefront, and then you kind of push things through with the Fatso. It brings all the sub up, it kind of sticks everything together. That coupled with the fact that I've also got a bus compressor on my stereo out, and what I also do is run the decapitator actually on my master out as well, which I'll come back to towards the end with my kind of final process. But I throw all my drums into the drum bus, and then what I start to do is you'll find as you put certain things in, the compressor will start to act in different ways and start to make things sound over distorted, so I tend that I'll kind of start to pull things out of the compressor and see if it can sit on its own and see if it still sounds kind of relevant, what have you. So I'll end up with a final process. Again, in this instance, I've got about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 different things going through the drum bus. Over the drum bus in total, if I just go and read through all these things here. Oops. So you can hear that's everything complete. So it's got the drum bus pushing the kick and gluing some of the high frequencies and stuff together. But then on top of that, I've got all the live percussion. Again, what I'll do is I'll listen to things where I'll put it through the drum bus and see those. So for instance, put the congas through the drum bus and hear what it does to it. And if I think, well, if that actually sounds all right, or it doesn't, or it's making the congas too prominent, I'll kind of go back in and take them out of the drum bus, and I go through this whole process. The one that I find that I end up stuck with more than anything else with the drum bus is looking at a kick drum, and it's in different instances that I kind of use the kick drum in the drum bus or out the drum bus. Sometimes it pushes the kick to a point where it takes over and it's just too much, and maybe you want to leave the kick out of the drum bus and it creates a different sound completely. But I think that's on a kind of track by track basis where I think of things that whether it fits the overall sound. And this song in particular, I wanted it to be quite heavy low end because I think there was a lot of work being done by the cello and the strings in the middle and the vocals kind of taking over the majority of the song. So it really does depend on, you know, each song and how I work with it.
There's a sub kick in that I'm hearing as well. Is that something you've just tuned?
Yeah, you'll hear. I think what it is, it's something. I've got this kind of big who sound on the sound, but there's also a really deep kick, which is that's actually playing off a stylus RMX. I probably spend more time on kick drums than anything else, and again I think that's because of the nature of my music and my background, is that the kick drum for me, it can be the defining point of a track or a dance track or a dance song, is that if the kick doesn't work or it feels too flappy, a lot of the times I end up with 4 or 5 kick drums running, all doing different little things and making up different sounds. I'm still on the hunt for the kind of ultimate kick drum that I'll use. I'll go through phases with things and I'll stumble across them and I'll use them through 4 or 5 different tracks, and then I'll kind of get bored of the sound of it. So I'll kind of move on and try and discover something else. I still like to try and incorporate some live drum. I like the air that comes off of the kind of beater and the microphone and things like that. I like to hear that breathing kind of sound that goes on in this, which is kind of what this has.
And what are things you said you spend a lot of time on kick drums? What are things that you usually do in layering, and you mean?
So I think the weight is quite important, but you can overdo that. So the sub, and it also depends on what the bass is doing. I mean, I've got a lot of room here because I've only got I haven't got a very low analog bass sound going on. You can hear, and then there's the live bass as well. So the sub's kind of playing an additional bass note in there, so that's giving it this sort of real heftiness that I'd like, you know, having heard it on a big sound system, it's heavy, it's almost kind of techno heavy, the bass sound, which in a lot of respects sort of fights against the nature of the song, because the song is quite poppy in a lot of respects, but I like the fact that you can kind of incorporate something that it translates in a completely different way. It's not it's not the way sort of a pop producer would think, unless you were kind of making hip hop and you were looking for that really heavy sub. And I try to incorporate that a lot into sort of the dance music that I make. So I'll always look for putting a sub. If the bass hasn't got a sub there, I'll try and tune a sub note of some kind that will run. And then I'll have a kick that will sit somewhere in the middle that will give that kind of chest feeling. Sorry, that's my microphone. I give that kind of chest feeling where you hear it right in the middle. So if you're listening on, again, a big pair of club speakers, you're also kind of feeling, not just feeling the bass, but you're hearing it kind of punching you. And then there's this kind of high frequency, this kind of air that I like to get off of the kick drum as well, which I kind of add to things. But again, it depends on what it is. You know, some things I do tend to where the bass notes or the bass line will do all of the work, and so the kick doesn't become the main feature. There'll be some things where the kick's just tucked away underneath and you can hear it. You can feel what it's doing, but it's not taking over the kind of nature, the very nature of the song, basically. And this is actually quite a rudimentary arrangement for me because there's a lot of electronic stuff going on. The live instances for all of this outside of the drums are the cello, which we did a lot of experimenting with. I do a lot of recording with a guy called Martin Radford, and I've recorded with him for a long, long time. An amazing cellist. He uses a Yamaha silent cello and then an acoustic, a live acoustic. We set up the live acoustic in the other room and record the live acoustic through biodynamic and into the API. Then I'll just take multiple takes. So here we have a group set up which has got as you can see here, there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 cello parts. Again, what I do is we'll record loops with Martin over sections, then we will overdub. Generally what we tend to do is record the main line again, pan hard left and right, or sort of halfway on either side, then record the next either octave up, the harmonies in different parts, layer those on top, and start to build a big stereo channel of cello parts. Then send all of those cello parts through to a stereo group on its own channel. Then I get into EQing, compressing, whether I add certain things on here. I think for some reason we had some click or some issues on some of the string parts, but I like the string parts, so I've run a declicker, which is a waves thing, which has taken away a few of the little pops on there, sort of irritating pops that have recorded onto it. So that will end up with the string parts in the context of the song. You'll be able to hear it. And then go into the kind of rise section. So we've built our kind of basic string parts, and then we've also, once I've got that, again, I've usually recorded in analog bass, analog guitar parts that are usually built from samples, and then I'll get someone to come in and play the bass parts and the guitar parts, replay the bass parts and guitar parts. So in this instance, we've got some live which was copied from, that's playing with a synth bass, which I think is off the Nord, and a live bass. And again, with a live bass, generally, whoever I'm recording bass with, I think in this instance was a guy called Richard Walters. He will come in, we'll either mic the bass up or go in straight into the DI on the API, which I think is what we did on this, was run into the API. Got a really good sound off of it, and then I'll go into kind of guitar amp and add some basic tubes. I've got just a closed back cabinet and a different mic on there. A lot of that, my guitar bass intuition in regards to using amps and cabinets and things like that, I usually follow other proper guitarists and what they use. So I do a lot of that by ear. So I'll run through a lot of different presets, and then I'll hear something that's close to a sound that I want that fits with the track, and then go in and EQ it and add sort of different various effects. Again, I've got there's a sidechain compression on here, which is compressing with the kick drum. So it's giving it some more definition, not being buried by the kick. And then you'll hear the kind of live bass. And then you can hear there basic guitar strums. So again, bass and guitar will have all been done in one session by the same person in this instance. So we'll add those guitar and bass elements, and I'll go in and start to mix the guitar and bass and get different sounds that I want out of them. So there's a massive guitar strum in here somewhere. All right. Okay, so this was actually a sound that came off of the guitar being sat on Rich's lap, being played with a battery, I think. So he's sat with holding the main plate and playing the different notes up and down with an actual square alkaline battery, which has got a kind of noise off of it and a kind of weird distortion. So we sort of played that back, and then you can hear the kind of weird feedback and stuff that came out, which tended to just sit well into the track. We'd had a lot of the track done there, so it just sat in, and it felt like a kind of appropriate. And there's a big guitar strum which I'm trying to find here. Oh, actually, this is interesting. It's not a guitar strum at all. We had the live Yamaha silent cello set up, which was being run through this little, you can't see it, but Vibra Fender Champ. So we were plugging the cello straight into a simulator, an amp simulator, but like an outboard amp, and then miking it and getting all these kind of weird experimental sounds off the cello, which hopefully you'll be able to hear. It sounds like a whale. And I've got those stereoed panning left and right through another group here, using Pan Man, which is a Sound Toys thing, which is great. I'm a big fan of the original Pan Scan, so I like playing around with this quite a lot. And then we went one step further with this, where we ended up recording more cello. So again, this is cello parts that were recorded that's recorded, actually, this cello part was recorded through a mic'd Marshall cabinet, which was set up in the other room. And you've got all the kind of weird distortions coming off of that. And then I think there's one more here on the end. So there's basically a lot of experimenting. Again, sounds like a guitar, but is actually a cello. So yeah, so that's like because I've recorded with a cello so much and we've done so much music together, we try and find other ways to make it sound not like a cello. With the silent cello, it was interesting because Martin had originally picked one up. He made the original music for the silent cello advert for Japan, and so they gave him one on a long-term loan that he could mess around with. And when I first heard it, I was listening to it and it seemed like a really easy way to record, but you start to get used to these kind of weird high frequencies that it can't replicate the same way as an acoustic cello does. And I end up EQing them out and it doesn't sound that good. So that was kind of led us to like, well, how about we just plug it into a guitar amp and make it sound completely different? And then it became this whole other instrument really, which was really quite fun to mess around with, which he's actually taken on the road with him, where he actually uses guitar pedals and delay plugins, etc., etc. And so those are all kind of part of the process of making this song, and I get to a point where it starts to sound really complete, maybe over complete, and start to take things a little bit away from it all. In this instance, I had a 303 running through it, and I wanted to make the 303 sound a little bit different and a bit mad. So I ended up running the 303 through, I believe, got it here, going through a stereo greet. It's going through a Doppler. Which was, again, me just messing around with plugins and I like to record a lot of analog gear in and then start to use the fact that you can use plugins with a lot of this equipment to do something different with them. So I ended up adding this kind of weird 303 sound in, which you can kind of just about hear in the song. Then it's actually got a proper 303 line in, and the two tend to play off of each other. So you've got a mixture of analog, live and digital equipment going on there really, and vocals.
So you do like to record stuff, but you kind of treat it as it's a sample, in that you come up with an idea and then you treat it as a sample by chopping it and affecting it. And
Yeah, because that's the bit I love. It's like, it's nice to be surrounded by analog equipment. It's nice to be use MIDI and do all those things, but I've kind of been through that whole process with music and with equipment, and MIDIing that stuff up left, right and centre, and getting lots of instruments to work together and have sort of happy accidents and things like that. I think you can incorporate that into like a modern studio and working in the box with things that you now have access to, which can really start to manipulate and mess with sounds. And it's trying to kind of incorporate the old school and the new school and come up with something different. So, for instance, the Doppler on the 303, when I first heard it, because it's quite hard to make a 303 do anything else. I've tried all kinds of different plugins. There's the obvious guitar plugin things which have been used to death. You've got people like Fatboy Slim that kind of originated using the 303 through guitar pedals and all of those instances. So I tried all these different things, and you can run a phaser on it and flange a bit. It still sounds like a 303, but then the kind of Doppler did something really weird because it's pitching and doing lots of interesting things. So it was kind of stumbling across it because it's one of those instruments that I love dearly and I don't ever want to kind of ditch it, but at the same time you kind of get bored of the sound of it after a while. So yeah, I do that a lot, kind of manipulate samples basically, yeah. And the same with recording like cello and live instruments. I'll get to a point where I've got, a full string section or almost like an orchestra, and then start cutting things up. Do the same thing with guitar, where we'll do multiple takes of guitar parts and then go in and start. There's an interesting plugin which I use on quite a lot of things. There's an interesting plugin on Cubase, which was on one of the recent editions. I don't remember what it's called now. It's here. Where is it? Called Loop Mash. And basically with Loop Mash, what I've actually done is taken the full sample parts of like a whole guitar section that I've recorded, bounced it down to one channel, and then thrown it into Loop Mash, and Loop Mash will just randomly pick samples. You end up with this kind of really, sometimes a little bit too mad, but it's kind of interesting new take on something like sort of manipulating live instruments. So. But like what I tend to do is do all of it while I'm working, like as I go along. I mean, there have been certain instances where I take the stems of things to mix them because I want a sound. So, a big Neve fan. So I go and work with a friend of mine at my loco to get everything kind of mixed out onto a big Neve desk, which is a specific sound. It changes everything for me when I'm starting to work in that. In this instance, I had the sound in my head. I know what I want the song to sound like. It's something that I think I could have done or I could do myself. So I'll set about mixing it and doing everything to the point before the actual mastering itself. So I'll get a pre-master together. So with this song, while I'm going along and doing all the mixing, I have a kind of basic setup on my master channel, which will be the bus compressor, which when I was sort of learning about bus compression, I kind of would use and go in and use the UAD presets and think, oh, that sounds quite good. You're saying that sounds interesting. Run that on the master channel, and then I've kind of tweaked this to the point where I've got something which it's kind of my set. It's become a sound that I kind of can identify with myself. So you can. Basically, it brings all the low end, makes it really tight. In a lot of respects, it sounds like it kind of takes something away from it, but it's down to a matter of taste, and I like what that particular sound does, because I think a lot of other stuff that I can work towards can be brought out again in mastering. So, and then with the decapitator, something that I just kind of stumbled across. And I was just fiddling around with something. I think I had the decapitator running on a bus channel, and again, if you have something like this where you can run it so you can just drive and get some real distortion, I was thinking, well, I could maybe try it on the master channel and see how it works. But if you start to run the drive and all these things, you can hear it a little bit too much. What I discovered was that if I just had it on a basic mix around, kind of somewhere around here between the dry and wet signals, and then switch between the channel modelling, and I had this, it added this kind of these harmonics to the song, which I actually thought, okay, this sounds quite good. So it does some things so I ended up with this kind of happy accident, really, of running the decapitator, and it's sort of something I'm kind of stuck with. It adds a sound, and it's kind of like a distortion of sorts, but it's kind of cool. What I do sometimes is I'll go in and see the difference where I'll set up like the Studer 800, and again I'll run through some variations and start fiddling around with the Studer and see if that's the sound that I want for my kind of final mix, which is a tape emulation of sorts. But the decapitator does something similar. In some respects I like it more. And then I have a limiter, which is just clipping the transients on this, literally somewhere along the line. So it means that I've got that on while I'm mixing, so it gives me a little bit more headroom, a little more space to play with, so I'm not constantly looking at what that is. I've got to go into it. I'll run compression on various different channels and try and get everything, so it's not deadening it and it's not sort of setting a brick wall, but it's just adding some little kind of clip moments there. So I'm not just constantly looking at that thinking, I've got red light, it distracts from the kind of creative process, really. I'm happy with how it sounds. Like at that point, this is, for me, it's like, that's exactly how the place where I could take it to. And then effectively now we'll bounce off all of those stems, but bounce them as wet stems with all the master points taken off, and then send them over to Pete, and then Pete will go and run them out on the mixing desk, and then get into the kind of more detail with stuff, which I could kind of let him do a lot of the work on that. And that's, you'll find, what I find especially working on the ATCs and NS10s is that the detail, I can go into a lot more depth with the detail than here on working the PMCs and getting something that I'm kind of just happy with as a pre-production sort of thing. But in some cases I'll actually bounce off. If I'm really happy with how the drums are, I'm really happy with how all the guitar parts are, I'll keep those as the wet stems. There won't be a lot that goes into them. They won't do a huge amount of work. What Pete generally tends to work on will be kind of vocal parts and bringing out the sound of the cellos and stuff like that. So yeah, it's quite a long process. And then sometimes I'll even get the mixed stems back and add an overdub and get to a point, because I've got these mixed stems that sound really good, but it's missing something creatively. So I'll go back in, maybe add guitar parts, maybe add drum parts and stuff like that. So I'll end up with something that I've effectively finished in the studio, but have taken out to an external studio and brought back in again. Yeah.